Rightio. So today we are going to look at seated rises. And again, seems like such a simple exercise. But when I sat back and thought of the exercises that I use across multiple age groups and for multiple different reasons, this was another one that kind of came to mind. It's been included in a few different programs. So in the Perfect Point book, we look at it in advanced foot control. We look at it more in regards to getting TID post activation and not really over gripping with the calves. In My Beginner Point, we're looking at it when they get into their point shoes to start articulating through the ankle, then the toes, the ankle. The Will I Have a Dance Again program, we do a similar version, but in standing, but I definitely do it in sitting for rehabbing dance injuries. And then in level 1, we talk about it a couple of different times in regards to basic classical technique and point range and the injury stuff. But I wanted to go through these particular ways, but also some other ways that I use this as well. So for the minis, for your little itty bitties, I use it in a couple of different ways. So one thing that I recommend doing is taking a bit of electrical tape or strapping tape and running it down from their knee over their ankle through to their second toe. Little itty bitties cannot see a sickled foot or a winged foot, but they can see a straight line versus a curved line. So when they're little itty bitty, before you do too much work on rise, it's a really good idea to work out, can this ankle go straight? Because if they're rising and sickling and you're trying to get them to correct the rise, but their anatomy or the way their foot is working isn't allowing that, that's going to get really frustrating for them and for you. So even as a quick screen, it's really good to know, can this ankle go straight? Most of the time, it's a little bit of practice to get it going straight. We're going to talk about some issues that may be underlying that may stop it from going straight. But it's a really nice way for them to play with actually making little train track lines. They can do single legs, they can do double legs, but they can much more easily see it if there's a line running down the front of the leg. And tape is easy to take off. I used to draw a line with a texture on their leg. It's hard to get off. So a little strip of kinesio tape is often pretty colors. And even playing with making different shapes can be really good for the little ones. The other one that you might want to have a play with is doing a double leg rise with a ball. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful with where you put it. So a lot of people put it between the heels, which you can do, but I recommend having a play with also putting it, you'll understand after we do the next slide, try putting it actually on the ankle bone, the medial malleolus, so that they keep that there. You can also do it up on the shin bone. The thing is, if you put it between their heels, they can squeeze their heels together a little bit, which can cause some issues with their subtalar joint. So I actually prefer balancing it between their medial malleoli. So if you happen to have a ball floating around, so just have a play with the ball between your heels versus between the medial malleolus versus further up the shin, and see which one for you feels like you get some better alignment. Yeah. Try it in sitting, Maria, because it does change it a tiny bit. The other trick is also to start almost like you're in a little plie. So shuffle the heels a little bit back so that when you rise, your shin bones are pointing straight down. If you start with the knee at 90 degrees, then you'll end up with the toes a little bit forward. So you want to actually start with the heels tucked in a little bit so that you have nice placement. Now, different anatomy likes different things. So just have a little play with the feet that are in front of you to see what gives them a nice alignment. But I'd just be careful of it between the actual heels, as sometimes that can cause them to squeeze a little bit too much. Now, you guys will find it easy to hold that in there. Some little ones, the minute they start going on to rise, they sickle and the ball falls out. Now, depending on the personality of the kids, you need to make it desirable for them to keep it there, because we all know what kids and rolling balls and things are like. So if they decide that it's funny to drop the ball or throw it away, you're going to have carnage. However, if you have a competition to see how many rises they can keep it there for, etc., just be mindful of the personality types that you're working with. Yeah, but nice, simple little tool to get a little double leg rise. For the little minis, so I'm talking 6, 7, 8, little ones, kind of pre-point that we're working on. Don't worry too much about their hip and back placement. They will lean over to look at their feet, and it's good for them to get an idea of what's going on. So don't worry too much about that. But one other thing to really keep an eye on in that age is anyone who, as they start to rise, their toes automatically start clawing up. Yeah. So some of them, it's a very passive position, just pressing up onto rise. If when they start to rise up, their toes are starting to be drawn into a claw, even when there's no weight on it, that'll often mean that they've got a lot of tension in the flexor digitorum longus, or those extrinsic ones up deep in the back of the calf already. This, I often get the parent involved with a little bit of massage, a little bit of mobilizing, a little bit of stretching, but that's more of a symptom fix. The real reason why they get so grippy is often a lack of hip or core control, and they're trying to use their toes to really grab onto the ground. So just use it as a bit of a warning sign. If you find that early on, think, ooh, we're going to have their foot control is going to be harder than a kid who it sits nice and flat without even trying. Yeah. Issues with the alignment. Now, this is one that I wanted to go through because it's probably a little bit something that you may not have thought or realized. So when I get someone to go into a seated rises position, I get down on the floor and I really watch the pathway. And one of the things that I'm wanting to work out, especially if they've had issues with their alignment actually in a rise, is it possible for them to rise well? So sometimes they'll habitually sickle when they're in class, but is it actually possible for them to rise? A couple of things that I'm watching out for. One, the length of the metatarsals. Do they have a long second toe and that's what's kicking them off to the side, or a very long big toe and they're dropping over onto the pinky toe? But sometimes, even when they're non-weight bearing, they're sitting on a chair, they'll rise and the foot will do a bit of a wonky pathway. And there's two particular joint restrictions that I find you can usually spot once you know what you're looking for. So one is the cuboid and one is the subtalar joint. So the cuboid is this little funky bone off on the outside of the foot between the heel bone and your fifth metatarsal. If you ask me, it's a bit of a dumb design. This is one of those bits of the anatomy that I really wish we could adjust. It's kind of hovering in midair. So sometimes in hypermobile people, or people who don't have a good walking pattern, it can drop a little and it gets a bit wedged. And this means that this whole outer border of their foot doesn't work very well. So they often don't get pain where it is. They may get pain up into their perineals sometimes. They may get a bit achy, but it's not a sharp pain. It just feels like they can't wing their foot to the side. But if they're trying to rise, sometimes they get blocked from full point and the whole outside of their foot kind of gets a bit glued together. So they try and rise and it doesn't get that nice shape that you want when you're pushing on to rise, because this stuff all gets stuck. So if it looks like the outer part of their foot just stays in exactly the same place from on flat to kind of 7/8 of a rise, and you're trying to get them up, but this part's not moving, it may be this. They may kick out into a sickle. So they'll rise up a little bit of the way and then they kind of do this quite sudden drop out into their sickle. So they're trying to get up with the inner part of their foot, but the outer part is just not playing the game. You try and correct them and you actually can't correct their foot. Like, it just really won't glide back into position. If their foot is moving normally and it's more that they're weak on the outside and they go up around the corner, you can usually give them a gentle support on the outside and it'll slide back into alignment. Yeah, that's a control issue, much easier to work on. But if they're really wedged here and you can't get them to come in, we often need to do some specific work on the cuboid. Now, therapists will often minute it back in place. There's a classic minute, sounds a bit like a gunshot. I'm very hesitant to minute it because most people who it drops, it's actually because it's a bit mobile anyway. I used to crack my own one in when I was a teenager on the ballet bars, on the claw thing at the bottom. My foot would feel stuck. I'd stand on it, stomp it down. It would crack, pop it back in. I could work my foot again. But do that over a period of a couple of years and it gets even more unstable. So the perineal massage, any cupping, gliding down through the outside can work. There is a specific mode, but you want to really, really kind of know where it is before doing that. The safest ways of the stuff that we know from doing all this training is usually more massage up through here, massage on the sole of the foot, then getting them to do either the James Bond or the 3D calf mode and actually giving it a little bit of a glide with your finger. If this is blocked, they won't be able to do the James Bond mobilizer. They'll kind of get to a point and the whole outer border of their foot will be blocked. Yeah. So therapists can get in there, give it a direct mode, but most of the time you can actually free it up by releasing the things that attach onto it. And that helps prevent any issues with overly mobilizing it. The big trick that I found with this one, a lot of people have it treated by a therapist and then they have to have it retreated and retreated. I make a little square of pad that I tape underneath the cuboid to help support it in place because it's just a bit of a dumb design. It's got nothing underneath it. So if it's a bit wiggly, it just drops back out again. Yeah. So a little wedge underneath and they keep it on whilst walking. It should feel comfortable. So sometimes it takes a little modification to find just the right level, but that can make the world of difference to their point range. Once it's actually back where it kind of should be, they can rise in place easily. So just something to keep in mind if you've got someone who's got those difficult feet and they're trying really hard to keep it straight, but they just can't. Yeah. The other one is your subtalar restriction. So we've talked about subtalar joint a lot, I think, in coaching calls. It's a bit of a doozy. It's this funky joint under here that articulates with your talus. So it's the undersurface of the talus, mostly with your heel bone, but it does have some other articulations as well. Now, this one is quite easy to spot. If they have a really stuck one, as they rise or go to rise, normally you'll get a tiny, what I call winking, a little bit of a swing of your heel. If the subtalar joint is locked, it does this really sudden twist at the end. A lot of people notice it in point shoes and it kind of sends the shank off. But if you notice that they rise, and then it goes yank, that's probably a bit stuck. If it is stuck, then they often won't be able to do, again, the 3D calf mode or the James Bond. And it can get blocked in either direction, but mostly I find they can't pronate. So their heel just gets a bit stuck. They're trying to work the middle part of their foot, but their heel just won't even go. Yep. So we've done some work on that before, doing the heel drag, doing the little heel wiggle, trying to get it moving. But the classic sign is that when they're rising or doing the seated rises, it does a little bit of a wink. So I use the seated rises as a test to go, okay, is there anything bony that's blocking your rise, or are we just dealing with control issues? Because I cannot tell you the number of kids I've had who've been told to do loads and loads of single leg rises by their teacher, but actually their patterning is impossible because of the restrictions in their feet. Yeah. Most of the time it's those ones. Other things that might impact it is if they actually don't have the big toe joint range. Yeah. So if they actually don't have enough extension through their big toe, they'll lean off onto the little toe to create a bit of space. This is where putting the padding in under toes 2, 3, 4, and 5 can often help. and that can really help them get a really nice point range without loading the toe. Keep in mind that if they are rising and they feel compression on the top of the toe, don't push into it. If they feel a little bit of stretching underneath, it's fine. It'll work better if you release it, massage, mobilize it, then retest. But if they've got pressure on the top, pushing into it is likely pressing those two joint surfaces together. It's better if you can give the toe a little bit of a pull before you stretch it. Give it a little bit of space. Yeah. Most of the time, if they've got a stuck big toe, their walking is the problem. So what they're doing with their big toe or not doing whilst walking is usually the issue. Yeah, they often don't have a roll through on big toe. Does that make sense? Yeah, so use it as a really good screen for the patterning. Once the patterning and placement is right, then all your conditioning exercises can follow along nicely, but I make sure that they can actually do that to determine, is it a range issue? Is it a strength issue? Little pre-pointers, loads of reasons why they should be doing this. So first reasoning is to see whether tib post is alive. We talk about this in the Advanced Foot Control book. It's something that I really like clearing on the pre-pointers. And this is something that when I started working with Vicky Attard for my beginner point thing, she really focused on it, but she didn't know anatomically what she was doing. And when I explained how tib post and gastroc relate to each other, she was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So she was really trying to get them to get that point through the ankle before coming through the toes. And this is something that I really, really, really work on. We want to be able to get up to a full height of demi-point and then give a little bit of a wiggle to the back of the calf. If they're using their gastrocnemius the entire time, they'll tend to get overload down into their Achilles tendon when they go on to point. So in the seated rises exercise, pressing up to high demi-point, consciously relaxing the calf and seeing if we can get a little bit extra. Because tib post comes down and attaches in underneath in this midfoot, when it works, it gives you that nice kind of high press point. And it's not related to your Achilles. It doesn't come and attach into your Achilles, whereas your gastroc and your soleus do. When you're doing a rise in person, yes, you have to use your big calf muscle. We want you to use your big calf muscle, but I like checking that they can actually get that last 1/8 of their rise with tib post before we even think about point work. Then bringing on the articulation of the toes. So in bare feet, making sure that they can achieve that super high rise, then peeling with their doming to come up to that full point. This is really important to make sure that they can differentiate the two on the way up, but also on the way down. So then keeping the ankle pointed, coming down through the toes with the ankle still pointed to offload the Achilles and put a little bit more load on tib post, then smoothly come back down. So can everyone grab their computer, put it sideways on and ideally on the inside of your foot and see if you can show that super high demi-point, bit of a calf wiggle, then incorporate the doming to keep the toes long. We'll do some from the side and some from the front. And bare feet if possible. So give it a good check on that high rise. And again, start with the heel a little bit further back so that when you are on high rise, your shin bone is vertical. Yeah. So gastroc will work through range, but when you get to the top, beautiful, Natasha, yeah, you reach this point where you can actually get a little extra nudge through the midfoot and front of ankle without gripping through the calf. Now, most of you have done this before. It'll usually be pretty easy. This takes a while for some kids to get. Yeah. Make sure they just don't press over onto it and be completely flaccid. Yeah. Beautiful. Then peel through from that demi-point, use pressure down into the floor. So like you do with the doming against the ball, the point through the demi-point, Beautiful. Really peel up to full point. Yeah. Then peel back through the toes, keeping the ankle fully pointed. Use pressure into the floor to give a little bit of resistance. And then lowering back down. Beautiful. And again, when they start doing this properly, they will get a bit achy underneath the ball of the foot. Yeah. So make sure, and with little ones, sometimes I even get them to put their hands on top of their knee to press down because they're not very good at opposing their own pressure. So pushing down, sometimes even getting their friend to put a hand on the top. I find this one is really good for them to do in pairs because they're often better at critiquing somebody else other than themselves. So beautiful. Yep, try both legs, see if it's different side to side. Maria, just do that one again. Yeah, just watch your second toe is lifting away from the floor. See if you can use a little bit more floor pressure underneath the pads of the toes. Better, yeah. So you want to actually feel muscle work up in your little lumbricals. Beautiful. Really nice. Now you don't really feel to post. If you want to check, you can shove your fingers right deep in the back of the calf and have a play. My cue is to usually pop my finger in underneath here and give a little bit of a lift. So they're not just sinking into range, even a tiny bit further forward from that, Natasha, just right up underneath the heel break. Yep, yep, even further forward, yeah, right up there. So if they get a feeling of, there we go, lifting from there, that will usually get, that's the insertion point of TED post. That will usually give a lot more lift up out of the shoe. Beautiful. Super. And come down. So this one as well, I find works really well if you film them. So often if they're, for some reason, if they're looking at their own foot, they can't tell that they're clawing. The minute they see it on a screen, they can. So I'm not sure if there's something weird with three-dimensional viewing versus viewing on the screen, but for some reason they can see their clawing far more when you actually film it and show it than they can when they're doing it. So there's some weird perception issue, but I find film them, they can see it even if they can't in real life. Really good if you're in that we're preparing for point thing, keeping a little catalogue of them so that they can watch it over time. Seeing the progress is really important for them. And I find that this is one of the most important things to get nailed, because if we can get that action happening in their first pair of point shoes, then you tend to have far fewer issues in those first 3 years, which is usually when the ones who haven't had good prep tend to have lots of issues in the first 3 years of being on watch. Super. Then we have, when they actually get their shoes, this is one of the exercises in the prep exercise section in my beginner point. Again, really making sure that we can actually establish alignment here in a completely safe, non-provocative position. Thanks, April. To really make sure that they can get that articulation. It takes a bit of thought, and they're often pretty little and weeny. There's not much weight through them, so actually articulating the shoe is a bit tricky for them. Again, I often have the hand on top to give a little bit of pressure so that it can actually work through the demi point a little bit more. Also very important to pre-weaken the shank. So most of you know I like doing a little bit of a pre-weaken at the heel break and at the demi point so that the shoe knows where you want it to wear in. If you don't, it will tend to wear halfway down and they'll burn through the shoes more quickly. So I like to make sure that we've actually sequenced the shoe, then get it on the foot, and then really pattern in parallel. Doing it in parallel helps avoid any of those interesting little sickles They have to work their inner thigh quite a bit to actually keep it straight, and they struggle sometimes in this position, but I find it's really good so you get a good clear patterning of foot control first. Once they've got that, then make sure you do it in turnout. So I get them to swing a quarter turn over the sides of the chair. This is really good because sometimes they'll have perfect control in parallel. The minute they turn out, they drop onto their big toe edge. So I find it's really good to map it in turnout in sitting before we actually start doing it in turnout in standing. This is actually a really nice position to work with rolling the thigh bone for their turnout and making sure that they've got a nice little sit up from the low back. But yeah, just keep an eye on their control from parallel through to doing it in turnout. Sometimes they do slightly wonky things, so make sure to pre-screen that. Yeah. In the beginning, I have them sideways on so they can use the mirror to watch their alignment. Then try and do it with eyes closed or not watching it, because the whole thing in point shoes, you can't be always looking down at your foot to tell it what's going on. So then being able to feel where good placement is of utmost importance. So if they have to be looking at it, they won't be able to do it in standing in class. Yeah. Super. No worries, Helena. I was having issues too. Super. So then we start getting into the more, probably a little bit more abstract ones that you may not have thought of. I also use it to build their deep postural endurance. So we talk about sitting posture in level 1. I often combine the two. So I'll teach them separately, then we bring them together. So making sure they have the awareness and endurance to be able to sit up from the tailbone, relax through the front of the hips, relax through the back of the rib cage, big global back muscles, nicely relaxed. If they have issues with this, you can use the K-tape technique initially, but we really want to be able to achieve about 30 seconds of sitting just quietly unsupported. Once they've got that, you can start challenging it. So you can get them to keep an eye on the tone on the back, peeling up through one foot just to the normal high seated rise. You could do it pinging up into a jump and just watching the level of tone in the back. This is really important when we're rehabbing kind of chronic back pain issues. Often as soon as they start to move, the back will grab on. So starting to introduce really nice, slow, little low-grade foot stuff is good. You can start it on a high stool. So if it's too much lifting the knee above 90 degrees and they tend to tuck, I put them on a high stool or the back of the couch so that they can work on the postural control and just lifting the leg in a lower range first. Then we bring their bottom down so they're actually lifting above 90 degrees. Yeah. You can also do it on a stability ball. Now, if you do this version, you will have more tone in the back because you're on an unstable surface. So don't get worried about having it completely relaxed, but you also don't want it to be locked on for dear life the entire time, but it will be more reactive. So if you have a ball versus a chair, first get it started on your chair and having a little play with your sitting posture. And the way I usually guide into it first is going into full flexion, keeping the upper back flexed and bringing the pelvis up. So thinking of lifting from the top of the sacrum. A lot of young students, as soon as they sit up from the tailbone, will bring their upper back up as well, and a lot of adult students as well. So try and keep flexing the upper body, bring the lower, the pelvis back to neutral, then unraveling. And I like getting a really weighted, you're still lengthened, you're not slumping, but it's a very downward energy, and then having a check to see that those are nice and relaxed. Yeah. Some people like having the feet a bit wider, some people like having it more face towards the front. Notice how you are today. If they're not sure whether their back is on or off, get them to tilt to the side a little bit, and they'll usually have a little bit of flicking on or off, or leaning forward from the hips. it will come on when you lean forward. So you want to make sure there's a discernible difference between soft muscles here and on muscles here. Yeah. Once they've found that, then try introducing seated rises. Does it feel the same either side? Some will be fine when they use one foot. When they use the other, it's a bit more reactive. Try going into the little seated jump. Once you lift the leg off the floor, you'll usually get a little bit of stiffening on the opposite side of the back. So if I pin my left foot up, my right side will do a little bit of a appropriate recruitment, as I like to say. It will come on. You don't want it to grab on and stay on when you put the foot back down. So just make sure that if it is coming on and off, it comes on and off, and it will alternate side to side. Some people, their right side goes when they lift their left foot, then their right side goes when they lift their right foot, because they've got a super reactive right side. Yeah, super. You can then try it on your more unstable platform. Ooh, this one needs a bit of air. But just notice, even right in the beginning, there will usually be a higher level of tone. You don't want it to be shift on 150%, but it'll usually be a little bit more active because it's adjusting a tiny bit more. Try your seated rise there. When you do the jump, you have to transfer your center of gravity very slightly to the side. If you don't, you'll either tip off or shift quite a bit. So think of bringing, if I'm going to lift this leg, I have to move my center of gravity over this foot more than I do on the chair. Ruth, just make sure you're not leaning forward too much. Your rib cage is a little bit more forward. Yeah. So this is a really good one if you've got those ones who are cracking their back frequently. They tend to tuck as soon as they take the leg to the front, really unstable lower back. Really good to build the control in here, and then you can tie in some of their foot control at the same time, so getting a multi-purpose exercise. Super. Any questions along the way? Just give me a wave. Oh, good. Natasha.
So I am interestingly having my back activate the same leg as I'm lifting.
Yeah. This will happen sometimes. See if you can focus on getting a little bit more of a deep hip suck.
Okay. Yep, that fixes it.
Yeah. So that will be is if you know you shouldn't lose neutral, but you're using your big back to do it rather than controlling from the deeper ones. Yeah. So a little bit more focus on psoas major will often help stabilize it and make the back soften right down. Yeah. Try then just doing the normal sitting. Just see if you can think of a 5% hip suck in sitting and see if that makes it easier to switch off your back as well.
That made it a lot easier. Wow.
Yeah. So if we can get the connection from the front, so this is where you've got to be really careful. In dancers are really good at faking it. So if you're watching them from the outside, they may look like they're perfectly held in neutral. I did this for years before I understood just how much I had to use my fingers, because from the outside it looked fine, but I was bracing with global back muscles. But once you can get the central stability, then it's exactly the same position, but the tone around it is completely different. So if you're having somebody who's struggling a bit, they're looking good, but it's just really tight. See if you can get that deep hip suck, and it's that really subtle, just thigh bone back into the socket to shift the stability to the front of the spine, rather than trying to hold and lift from the back. That can make a big difference.
Now, is it okay when I do that little hip suck that I do feel my hip flexors a little bit?
Yes, so I will talk, we're going into hip control next. Appropriate recruitment is you don't want too much gripping up here, but you will feel it in here.
That's exactly where I feel it.
Perfect, yeah. So, and you, again, it's that, not, yeah, with great muscles always make sound effects. But it's you want to keep an eye on the top. So TFL and Rec Fem, we want to keep a little bit soft, but Zoas Major and the iliopsoas tendon will have a bit of tone in it. So that's totally fine. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So speaking of which, oh, Rebecca.
Yeah, when I did the jump thing, I felt like I didn't feel really any activation come on in my back with the jump, but I did feel same side obliques.
I would
so
say
it's like they were stabilizing things, and I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but
I'd say that's probably a good thing. Hang on. Yep. Yes, yep, mine come on too. Yep.
Okay, cool.
I would far rather you stabilize from the front than lock with the back. Yeah, so I think that's a very appropriate. Yeah, and that's the thing, we're looking at appropriate recruitment rather than everything locking on. Yeah, interesting. I've never actually, I don't feel it there, but they're working. So it's interesting. Have you recently done some ab conditioning exercises to make them more heightened?
I mean, I just do regular stuff. We did go on like a 5-mile walk run this morning, so that I just got back from.
I'd say you probably have, if you've had some pre-activation, you might feel them a little bit more. I've just never had anyone report that that's where they feel it without assessing it. So yeah, but it's good that they're working.
Okay, cool.
Excellent. Right. So hip control. Now there's a couple of different ways that I like looking at this one. And interestingly, seated rises can really help the control of the leg, both a la seconde and devant, if you do it right. So it's a very specific way of looking at it. So you want to sit on the chair as we did for these ones, but we're going to play with rotating the thigh, and then we'll actually do a little bit of an unfold. Now, this is one of the ones that I realized I don't have an exercise, a picture of, so I'll give you a bit of a demo. And this is one that you will get some activation through the hip, but you want just enough, not too much. So if you find portion and sit, the problem is that when most young students go to second, they tuck and try and anchor their leg there. So our aim is to get a good sitting posture, keep lifted through the tailbone, and then just play with the roll of the thigh bone whilst staying lifted through the base of the pelvis. So you can actually feel, you get your deep rotators start wrapping in around the back while staying lifted. Most couple that, we want to stay lifted at the top of the tailbone and feel a little wrap in underneath. So just have a play with that initially. Then I find I actually like to get the whole thigh supported. You can use the back of the chair if you like, thinking of getting the thigh bone rolling and then unfolding and seeing if you can keep that roll as they lengthen. Yeah. So we don't get the back dropping when we're trying to hold, or this hitching through the top. So lift through the top of the sacrum, roll the thigh bone, and then you'll be able to feel that roll. Again, a deep hip suck at the front can help, but it should mean that they're soft through here whilst getting the control from a little bit deeper. And I can feel that nicely working in and around underneath. Let's have a little play with it in a second. And feel the difference in the activation around your hip if you roll back on your tailbone. And it'll all go into the top of the hip. So finding that support through the back, the deep hip suck, and actually using the chair to find the roll can be really handy for placing the gesture leg in second. This can be a really handy one if you've had someone with hip issues and they haven't been lifting their legs and then you're about to start reintroducing it in class. Test it out here first. Do they have it? They may be able to do once or twice and then it fatigues. So we want to build up their endurance of being able to do it with a little bit of support underneath before we start rocking it in a full class. Yeah, just make sure you assess yourself side to side, see how your balance is. That's quite good because they can do their second, doesn't have to be fully all the way open. And it often is handy to know what their placement should be looking like in second. Yeah, you can also try rolling the thigh bone in and out, even when it's extended, so they can feel how much that changes the patterning in the hip of shifting it. When you've got that beautiful roll, all the load comes out of the quads. The quads can then look after extending the knee rather than actually holding the leg. Beautiful. Rebecca.
So you were saying to monitor some spot that was soft. Or so like when I lift, like right here kicks on, and is that supposed to kick on, or is that the spot that's supposed to be soft?
Let me grab my spine. Ooh, my spine is out in the other room. One sec. As what happens in my house, dinner, people over for dinner turns into anatomy education session. The psoas is fine to be open. So psoas will pass down along here. If it's more active up towards these bony crests, it's probably more your rec fem. So it depends how high up on the pelvis you're feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like right here. So this is soft.
Yeah, good.
Right here.
Yeah. So looks like TFL is soft. If you go into the position and then kind of super tighten your quads, does it make it worse?
No, doesn't change it.
Yeah. So it's probably just psoas. I would say it's fine.
Cool.
Yep. Yeah. So it's kind of, as it wraps around, the deeper in towards the groin, that's where we want to get a nice little centering. It's if it's up and on the outside TFL or the top of that rec fem, it's really ropey. And so a lot of people will get too much overuse in there, but that looked pretty good placement. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's a good thing of like it, I guess if it kicks on more, then it's probably like rec fem.
Exactly. Yeah. If you tighten your quads and it goes bing, then that's you're probably overusing rec fem. Yeah. Cool. Excellent. You can also do it to the front by starting, and this is quite nice actually to do, is sitting with the feet in fifth and then drawing them up into a rise in fifth. So you actually get kind of a slight slow draw, then lifting in attitude to the front. So this is another great one that you can really work on maintaining the lift from underneath, getting a nice little scoop and getting that feel of the rotation supported by deep hip flexors rather than outer hip flexors. This is another one that often I'll start it on a high stool to get the action. Then as they get better, drop the seat lower and lower. That you want them to be able to do this. So little Lucy here is being able to stack her spine and bring her leg up to about 135 degrees. Yeah, really going to help out with your adage to the front. Yep, bottom leg stays on high rise, lower, switch sides. Alternate sides with this one, and they don't need to do many. It's more of a cross check to see, is your spinal control good enough to handle that nice deep hip flexion? But again, it's a way of playing with the same action Nice little seated rise. Can we actually get the focus on the spine and the foot control at the same time? Really interesting one. If you've got people who are great at adage, they can often do this quite easily without really thinking too much about it. The ones who struggle to get their leg up, the minute you try and stabilize it here, some of them cannot move the leg. They just have nothing if they can't tuck the pelvis. So they're the ones you want to catch. Super. Rehabbing jumps. Very, very important. So I call them seated rises and seated jumps. They must have a good demi-point, full point, demi-point down pattern first. Then we move to make sure that they are not landing on a high demi-point. So if you're doing it for point work, I'm high demi-point up, high demi-point down. When we're doing it for a jump, you actually start pressing at about 2/3 of the rise so that you ping in the air. Then as they land, they actually unravel the ankle and the foot at the same time. So you never want to land your jump on a high demi-point. That's going to be pretty awful for your foot anatomy. So just have a play with changing your seated rise so that it's coming down and you're actually flexing the ankle, flexing the toes at the same time to cushion the landing. We start off patterning it very slowly, peeling through like a slow motion jump. The aim is then to make it faster and faster and faster and work out the speed that you can do while still keeping your toes long. So a lot of people will be able to do a slow version, toes are nice and straight, but they're still clawing their toes in the jump because that fast pattern is hardwired because they've been doing it for 10 years. So we want to see if we can get it faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and sustained so that we know their foot control is going to be good during their allegro. Yeah. A great tip is to have the music that the rest of the class is doing for a pitti allegro on chamois. They have to sit there and do it with alternate feet for the entirety of the song of the track of music before they will be okay to do it in class. So a lot of people do only little small sets of their exercises and the endurance to actually do the class exercise isn't included. Yeah, you can do it on a single foot or you can do it alternating. So just have a little play with that jump pattern and see if you've got a speed that everything starts to claw again. So even people with beautiful slow foot control sometimes struggle when we start doing repeated versions at a little bit of pace. If your back's getting a bit tired, you can shuffle back into the chair and use that as a support for now. Ideally, you want to be able to do both together. Beautiful. Make sure there's a bit more pressure into the floor. So you're driving the floor, driving the floor away. And you guys aren't doing it, but a lot of students will kick their foot forward. Make sure that the foot is ending up pointing the floor rather than flicking out to the front. Beautiful. Yeah. You can do it with the focus on the up. You can also do it with the focus on the down to get the cushioning and shock absorption. So almost do a little resisted lower. Yeah. Yeah. Just changes the focus of it to get a little bit more intrinsic and soleus control on the way back down with a little resisted lowering. Then of course you can change it into your standing jumps and standing with a fondue on one and the ping on the other, and then into something like the prep for petit jeté exercise. We're actually transitioning it through, but this is usually the first stage that I get where we're progressing them back, but I just don't want them to have too much impact in class. Yeah. Looking beautiful. Super. Any questions on that one? Can also be done sitting on a ball. This one's a bit tricky. Sitting on a ball and alternating from side to side. Really good for your central postural control because you have the little shift, but really nice to stabilize, kicks in, turn out like you wouldn't believe, because you're actually having to stabilize laterally whilst sitting on the ball. And it's a bit of a killer one when they're thinking that their exercise is getting a bit easy. Can bust that one up. Then, because I know you love them, I made you a little cheat sheet to check off the bits. So we have bare feet and point shoes, left foot, right foot. So some things that you might want to keep an eye out for, let me know if I've missed anything, what their foot is placed like on flat. So if they're starting from a pronated position, not good. Can they actually get a good foot position before they even start? Their alignment through the process, some take a bit of a scenic journey. So making sure that we've got good alignment through, checking that we haven't got any of those middle rear foot restrictions. Toes are long and relaxed. Excellent. What is their actual point range like on rise? Are we happy with that? Does that need some work before we really clear it off? Calf relaxed on full rise to check the tib post to make sure we've got that. And watching for that heel to see a little bit of a twist is good. A big sudden lurch, not so good. One that doesn't move, also not good. So if it doesn't change at all when they rise, they're actually not getting their full point range. So when they are in their full point range, it'll do a tiny little supination, but we don't want a sudden lurch or excessive. Then toe articulation to full point. What's their alignment like? Do they suddenly go into a sickle when they take the foot off the floor? Do they claw as soon as they start peeling off? Do they have appropriate toe pressure? And the repeated fast seated jumps. What happens when we add load? Pelvic placement. Do they have to tuck in order to lift? Do we have this placed nicely? Give it a check and turn out. Make sure that even if they've got awesome alignment in parallel, do they start sickling or winging when they go into second? And do they have some concept of resisting the lowering as well, actually creating force within their own body to resist movement rather than just plopping the foot down on the ground? So all your barefoot stuff. In point shoes, same but different. Good placement on flat, making sure they're not rolling onto the outer border of the shoe or the inner border. Do they actually have a nice smooth pathway? Can they differentiate their ankle and their demi-point articulation? Ankle, point, release the point, release the ankle, really making sure we can separate those, especially on your little newbies, because they'll tend to just pop up onto the platform rather than work through the shoe. On full rise, what their placement is like, this is also an ideal time to check the fit of the box. If the box is too narrow and their foot is kind of bulging over the top, you'll usually see it here. So great for doing whilst we're assessing what shoes are going to be good for them. Then how do they actually have that pressure and resisted feeling, or are they just kind of popping onto point? That toe articulation, and I cue them to have the pads of the toes doming against the base of the shoe. Yeah, which is why I don't like the really gelatinous toe pad thingamies. Smooth transition, no snapping, especially the ones with lots of point range. They'll often go from demi point and then kind of whack it into full point. Those ones usually won't be able to come back down through the ball of the foot. They can only kind of unlock the ankle to come back down. So I have a smooth transition in and back. Check out what the shank does on rise. If it's swinging off to the side, it may be that their subtalar joint is a bit stuck, or it may be that the shank hasn't been broken in effectively. If you've got a reasonably mobile foot and a very stiff shank, it will swing off to the side. The other thing to check on this is, remember when we did the point through the demi point on the ball, really making sure that they're pushing with their pinky toe and their big toe. If they tend to drop their big toe, they will twist the shank in a point shoe. So a lot of students blame the shoe when it's actually that they're pressing with the big toe and twisting the shoe themselves. As I said, fit of the box. Make sure that they can get that peel through the toes, keeping the ankle fully pointed. On the lowering, Again, pelvic placement and alignment and turnout. So 2 nice little screening things. You don't have to do them on the same day, but just good to go through, especially if you've got ones who are already on point. Having a really close look at those things can often kind of uncover things that have been sitting there for a while that make their issues in class make sense. So I find it's really good for nutting out what actually their problem is, rather than them just doing more TheraBand rises. And then, as per usual, I have my little review of what components of the exercise were the most challenging for that person. What other exercises could be used to work on this element? I'll take off that S. So if they have that they're really struggling to get into full point range, you may think of the other exercises that we have for assisting point range. If they've got that locked subtalar joint, maybe we're doing the foot massage and the heel wiggle and the James Bond and all of those things. They don't just have to practice this in order to get better at it. And what impact will that issue have on their classwork? That they're probably really struggling to actually get that full elevation on rise. It may mean that they're sitting back a little bit and getting extra tension in their quads, and then they're struggling with issues down into their knees. So just thinking about those ramifications, really getting some beautiful seated rises, I find is something that helps just about every dancer, especially ballet, but often the other styles need it as well. 901, yes, yay! So any questions on that one? Who knew that seated rises could take up an entire hour? Rebecca?
If you have some pre-pointers who are not cleared yet for point, but have been given some demi-point shoes to work in, can they work on kind of that articulation through a point shoe?
Yeah. With supervision, not at home.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I've discovered that if young, very excited pre-point students get given demi-point shoes, they just use them as point shoes. So, but if it's under supervision at the studio, great, go for gold. It's also what I do. If you have people who are on point, who you know shouldn't be on point, so you've inherited them from somebody else, or they've been pushed through with their class. I know it happens all the time. The prep exercises in the My Beginner Point are exactly for that, of how can I give them exercises in their point shoes that are actually not going to be dangerous, and that demonstrate to them that they're not yet ready for point work. So it's for beginners, but also people who you have to kind of keep them in their shoes for political reasons, but you really don't want to give them much classwork. That whole series is great for that. I've had to do that lots. Sometimes other physios will clear them for their point shoes. I'm like, oh my goodness, did you even look at this child? And then they're having issues. So the parents just bought these shoes. So kind of keeping them in them without them dancing in them, I find is actually quite a helpful stage. Yeah. And it's really good for them to get that feeling. Also just practicing tondus in them is really nice. So if they are articulating well in those kind of soft demi points, they should be able to shape the shank like this. If they're clawing, the shank will buckle away from them. So it's a really handy little watch point to have. I had a big chat with MDM about this the other day, because with the sole of the shoes, on some people were complaining that it was popping away. And then I demonstrated, I said, that will happen if you claw. But if you actually use the shoe and your foot, it'll suck it in. I'm like, excellent. That's a great way of explaining it. Because if you're scrunching, it'll make that ball in the top. There is no way that the shoe is going to suck into your foot. But if you've got good lumbrical control, then it can look extraordinary. Yeah. Excellent. Super. Thanks, guys. Nice participation going on today. So just probably big, I know most of you are on summer breaks and stuff, but there's so many different ways of looking at these exercises that it doesn't have to be hundreds of them. So hopefully that's given you some ideas to dive into them a little bit more in detail across multiple age groups. And I look forward to hearing how you go. Super. Thanks, guys. Have a good 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.